Well, Jess, let's not waste any more time. Are you ready for rapid fire?
It is, why they pay me the big bucks.
That's right. All those big dollars to come in for this question. Which Notre Dame player are you more confident will have a career year this season? Wide receiver Jayden Thomas or Viper defensive end Jordan Botelho?
As much as it pains me to say this, I have to go with Jordan Botelho at Viper because I believe this season is better teed up for him comparatively. He has the starting role, and it is essentially his position to lose, right? I think Jayden Thomas is still going to have a rather good season in terms of, his productivity compared to his, first few seasons at Notre Dame. But the realistic situation is the wide receiver room is a much deeper position than the Viper position. There are more opportunities at the wide receiver position comparatively at the Viper position. Even if Jordan Botelho struggles, he is going to be in at least a 2-man rotation, maybe 3-man rotation, depending on how bad his struggles are. But he is going to have a lot of playing time comparatively, right? Just because of what I was just outlining, the wide receiver room has more depth. There's more bodies that can step up. And I think just that's the way I chose to kind of analyze this question in terms of production. So I have to go with Botelho at Viper.
Yeah, and it's not a shot at Jayden Thomas or his talent or anything else, but because of some of the things you're talking about, because they went out to the transfer portal and brought in some other guys from the portal who are also going to play outside, the numbers game doesn't favor Jayden Thomas. Like his work ethic favors him, but he's also moved out exclusively to the boundary for the most part. The best production that he has had so far in his career when he's been healthy has been out of the slot, but I don't think we're going to see much of Jayden Thomas in the slot anymore because you've got Jaden Greathouse and Jordan Faison who are going to be the primary guys there. So Thomas is outside more. The numbers that they've got at the position don't favor him. The numbers do favor Jordan Botelho. And look, 32 tackles and 4 sacks last year. I mean, it's not an extremely high bar for Jordan Botelho. Like 4.5 sacks as a reserve guy 2 years ago are his career high. So he gets to 6 sacks and even 40 tackles. That's an increase in production right there. And I think it's just going to be harder for Jayden Thomas to have a considerable bump considering all the things that we outlined that kind of work against him a little bit. So I've got to go with Botelho as well.
Yeah, there's just, there's going to be an increase in output on offense this season, no doubt. It's just there's so many more people that the ball can go around to at the wide receiver, running back position. So I just, like you were saying, I just find it harder for Jayden Thomas to really get that sort of output that's going to be shared amongst, a larger group. And then comparatively to Botelho, where the bar isn't set very high, it's very obtainable goals, essentially.
So we talked on yesterday's show about how Notre Dame should approach its future scheduling in the expanded college football playoff era, which begins this season. And a listener made a comment on YouTube on the video last night. He said that he thinks Notre Dame needs to have one of the top 10 toughest schedules annually to basically to be able to remain independent. He also says he wants Big Ten teams like Michigan, Michigan State, Purdue, and Ohio State on a constant rotation on Notre Dame's schedule. Do you buy or sell more Big Ten teams on the schedule? And you can also address the top 10 toughest schedule, that's in there as well.
Yeah, I'll start with the top 10 toughest schedule comment. I do believe that Notre Dame needs a relatively tough schedule in order to remain independent, because I think that's the biggest knock that they're going to face in the expanded playoff areas. Everyone else is taking on a tougher schedule because these Power 4 conferences are beefed up, right? So what does Notre Dame do in response? I think in order to stay independent and to stay on people's good side, you naturally need to, increase your schedule. But if you look at Notre Dame's track record, they have annually a very, tough schedule. And so and
that's actually something that, people like to take shots at Notre Dame's schedule, but year in and year out, this season is probably going to be a little bit different. But year in and year out, you're right. It actually stacks up very well because of the way they schedule.
Right. So I don't think Notre Dame necessarily needs a top 10. I just think they need a top 25 schedule year in and year out. And I think that's what they consistently do.
Right.
And then moving on to the next part of the question, I do buy them actually rotating in more Big Ten opponents, because to me it makes sense. It's regional, right? So you don't have to travel very far when you're considering Ohio State, Michigan State, Purdue. And I don't have any issue if you want to start maybe looking at Oregon, or if you want to maybe start looking at, some of these other teams that have joined the Big Ten. But I think you can have a rotating schedule amongst the Big Ten where maybe 1 or 2 games a season you slot in 2 Big Ten teams along with your 4 ACC teams, or however that many turns out to be. You include, USC's in the Big Ten now, so they get a part of that, maybe 1 or 2 Big Ten opponents every season. And then, I don't mind keeping Navy. I think you could kick out a team like Stanford, but I don't need to see any more Tennessee States. I think that was last year
yes.
was a mistake, and especially with the expanded playoff, going forward. I don't want to see those sort of opponents on the schedule. I wouldn't mind replacing last year Tennessee State with, a Purdue or a Michigan State or someone like that.
The reason they already had 2 bye weeks during the season. There's going to be 2 bye weeks during this season as well because of when they play Texas A&M. And the reason they played Tennessee State was because you're coming back from Dublin. I don't know obviously there are a lot of intricacies to putting together a schedule and being able to find teams that fit in place, but it was essentially like, okay, you're not going to take the bye week early. You're going to take 2 during the season. You're going to compensate for it by playing an FCS team that you should be able to beat up on, which they did, and it allowed them to get, like any jet lag factor and all that kind of stuff. But I agree. I don't want to see any more FCS schools. But you're right. I think that really you don't have to necessarily be a top 10 schedule. I would say top 15 to 20, like you said, 25. And typically that's what they're going to be. And Brent said, Brent, when we were talking about the strength of schedule, 2024 is the exception. I mean, we'll see what it ends up being. Obviously, these teams that maybe we're not thinking as much of right now, they could overperform this year, and it could make it ultimately a tougher schedule. That's typically what happens. And that's why Notre Dame, even though people look at the schedule and don't always think that it looks that great, and I'm talking more from the outside, they take shots at Notre Dame's schedule, but what ends up happening is it ends up being a very competitive schedule, and it is typically weighted because of the fact that they've had Ohio States and Georgias, and Clemson ends up on the schedule 3 times in the last 6 or 7 years or whatever it is. But when there's no getting around the fact that when you've got 4 group of 5 teams on the schedule going in, 2 MACs and then 2 service academies, that should bring the strength of the schedule down a little bit this season. So, when you talk about it being an exception, it should be. I mean, we'll see. Who expected Louisville to be what they were last year? We'll see what it ends up being. In terms of the Big Ten teams, when I first looked at this, I'm thinking, because I think somebody came on last night and was saying they want 4 Big Ten teams on the schedule every year. I think that would be a bit much, even though USC is going to be included in the Big Ten, so that'll be part of that number as well. I've never been that excited about Purdue. And, like when they used to have Michigan State, and Purdue, and a lot of the times Boston College all on the schedule every year, I never liked that, because what ends up happening is for teams like Michigan State, Purdue, and Boston College, all stepchild type programs, they all essentially consider Notre Dame a much bigger rival than Notre Dame ever considered them. So there was just always more on the line, it seemed like, for them playing against Notre Dame. So I definitely don't want all of them on the schedule at the same time, but I don't mind, as this says, when I think about it more, these Big Ten teams in rotation. You're always going to have USC, and again, they're going to be a Big Ten team. I definitely don't mind a rotation of seeing some of these other Big Ten teams coming on and off the schedule on a regular basis going forward.
I mean, quite honestly, I just kind of miss, Notre Dame's schedule from like 2005 to 2010 when it was like Penn State, Michigan State. You rotated in maybe a UCLA, a Tennessee. Washington was on the schedule a little bit. I think if they go back to that older format and you keep 2 Big Ten teams per year, one of them is obviously USC, and then you kind of rotate that other one every year between Michigan State, Penn State, Ohio State, and then you keep relatively the same schedule of your core ACC, your service academies. I don't see why that schedule wouldn't, you know what I mean? Like, I think that's a solid schedule every year, to be honest with you.
Say that again. I'm sorry. I was looking at one of the comments.
No, it's okay. So like having USC as your one, obviously Big Ten team every year.
Right.
And then you rotate a second slot between either Michigan State, Michigan, Penn State, Ohio State, basically a regional Big Ten team.
Yeah.
You keep your 4 or 5.
I would like to see Penn State get in the rotation here at some point.
Yeah. And then you keep your 4 or 5 ACC slots. So now you're up to, 6 or 7 games. You have your 2 service academies. So then you're up to, 7 or like 9 or 10 games. And then you have, whatever you want with the last 2, maybe a MAC school, maybe keeping Stanford. I think it's definitely doable, I guess is what I'm saying. And I like the idea of I think the main takeaway is I like the idea of rotating a Big Ten spot, every 2 years, basically. You get a home and home, and then you move on to another big team, home and home, home and home. And I think that would keep a lot of people happy.
Yeah. I agree with that for sure. And, some people were saying get an SEC team on there every year. John says beating an FCS team doesn't help Notre Dame's strength of schedule. You're absolutely right. But, like last year when you had the FCS team, you obviously had Ohio State, you had Clemson, Louisville ended up being pretty good. Duke was a good team as well. So, again, the schedule, the schedule ended up kind of offsetting the fact that you were playing that FCS. And a couple of comments from Michael Hahn as well. He said Purdue was on it because they were the only original Big Ten school that didn't boycott Notre Dame, when Michigan organized it in the late 1920s. You're right. And again, I'm not hung up on something that happened basically 100 years ago at this point. When you talk about Big Ten grudges at that point, all those people are pushing daisies at this point. So I'm not nearly as hung up on that, but you're right. And that was overlooked. The fact that a lot of people talked about the Michigan series ending when in fact it was an intermittent series at best. I mean, there were large breaks between Notre Dame and Michigan ever playing. Purdue and Michigan State played much more regularly than Michigan ever did. And there obviously is proximity there. But again, that became much more like I'm just going to be honest. I don't like dealing with the nasty Purdue fans who come to town when Notre Dame and Purdue play because they're just flat out nasty most of the time. Now, there are some, like the locals, you don't hear it from as much, but I just not down with that. Just not down with it. Because, again, it means more to them than it does to Notre Dame. And, Michael's also right about the 24 strength of schedule is not Notre Dame's fault because Miami should have been on it. They screwed Notre Dame over. You're absolutely right. We mentioned that yesterday. It is what it is, but there's, whether it's Notre Dame's fault or not, Notre Dame is going to have to deal with it this year. I put it more on the ACC. Like, you shouldn't have just let Miami off the hook. Like, you should have told Miami, you got to get rid of that extra game. It's not on Notre Dame to do this. You screwed it up. You get rid of that extra game and you figure that out in the future. That's what it should have been, but that's not what they did. So, okay. So the NCAA has approved allowing commercial sponsor advertisements on football fields for regular season games beginning this season. Do you think Notre Dame's ever going to put sponsored logos on the field at Notre Dame Stadium? So
I looked up Notre Dame's official sponsors of Notre Dame athletics. Wanted to make sure I had the right ones. Dick's Sporting Goods is amongst them. Teeling Whiskey is another one. Yeti is another one.
That's what I want to see. I want to see the Teeling Whiskey down there.
Meyer, DirecTV, Howard Bailey, which is a financial service, Allstate, obviously NBC. I think
Is Coca-Cola still one of them?
They are not on the official sponsorship.
They
Old
were
Dominion,
for several years. Okay.
Yeah, Old Dominion Freight, and then of course Guinness. So to me, knowing that this is Notre Dame, I think that list automatically gets condensed. They're not putting whiskey or Guinness on their
unfortunately
on their field. So to me, what this comes down to is I think there's 3 like viable candidates. I think that you could definitely see the NBC logo down there somewhere on the field. I think you could see the Meyer logo.
Well, there's already, when it's a Notre Dame home game, there's already NBC logos all over the TV screen. So I don't know if you need any more of that necessarily, but that obviously is the biggest one, what they're getting from them.
And then
don't forget Under Armour though as well.
Under Armour,
yeah,
Meyer, DirecTV. So like, Allstate. I guess what I'm getting at is like if they were going to do it, I think it's a very small group of who it would be. I think it'd be like it's plastering another NBC logo down there somewhere, Allstate or Meyer. I don't think they do anything fun. Is ultimately what I'm getting at, and I think it'd have to be like a very big global brand essentially that offers no sort of repercussion essentially.
Well, and I think that it would be either like you ran through that list. Whoever it would be, they would have to pay, I think, an astronomical amount of money to get Notre Dame to do it. That like Notre Dame has always resisted that, and that was one of the the pushbacks when they did the video board that they put in there was people were worried that there were going to be just a boatload of advertisements up there on that video board, and they've resisted that. And I just feel like Notre Dame doesn't even put lettering in the end zones still.
Right.
They don't put Notre Dame or Fighting Irish or a Shamrock in the end zones. They've still got the white stripes in there. If they're going that route, I have a hard time seeing them putting copious corporate logos out there.
Well, no, I guess ultimately that's the way I would prefer it. I like the simple traditionalist type of look. Right. And I think if you've already kind of set the stage or the standard that's what you're going to do. So I don't believe there's any reason to deviate from it. I feel like Notre Dame does their sponsors well. I think that they don't need more, exposure or logos on the field. There's already commercials. There's already, like you were saying, the big board during the game. I prefer the field to be pretty simple. I think they could add a few things here and there, but it would be relative to Notre Dame and Notre Dame football. I don't think that they should branch out and start adding more corporate sponsors essentially.
DK, this might be like DK's second best ever point that he's actually, legit point that he's made on this show. I have to give you kudos for that, DK. He says that they do it on the telecast where they just add them to the feed. So essentially it's like green screen. Basically they're superimposing a graphic on the screen, just like the first down line or the red zone line or, whatever it happens to be. Like it's an extra package within the NBC deal. What do you think about that? Do you think that they would act like that they would do essentially a graphic on the screen that only TV viewers would see? It's not actually a logo on the field, but yeah, like the NBA does it. When you watch a baseball game, I realize not that many people watch baseball games.
Oh, the Reds did that on their mound. I recognize they rotate the sponsor on their mound.
Yeah, there's a lot of
how do they do that?
Mound or on most of the signage that you see at a Major League Baseball game that shows up on TV, like on the backstop behind the batter, that's actually just a green screen there. And like stuff, a lot of times NBA stuff as well. It's like a green screen type deal where they just put the ad up and you're only seeing it on TV. People who are at the game wouldn't actually.
I would prefer that route because I think it keeps the fields and the in-game experience more genuine.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that as well. Now, and that involves your TV sponsor as well, But I think that having a guy like Pete Bavacqua as your new point man, a guy with a TV background, I think that things could get more creative along those lines, where there's something in it for both NBC and Notre Dame, potentially. So I think that makes more sense, that it's stuff that's going to show up on the TV screen, but it's not actually going to be on the field itself. So you're not cluttering up your field, and you could actually do more with that, because then it's not just one or two sponsors. There are a lot more sponsors who could rotate throughout the course of the game that you would see on your TV screen if you did it that way, than if you actually plastered something on the field itself, which again, they're still doing white lines in the end zone. So I have a hard time thinking that they're actually going to put something fixed on the field out there. So here's what new Dallas Cowboys defensive coordinator Mike Zimmer had to say after working with former Notre Dame linebacker Marist Liufau. Quote, "Number one, he's brilliant. He catches on really quick. He wants to be so good and so intense. He's almost too much at it right now. The other thing is, I think he's a really good pressure player. And I think having that with Micah Parsons and another pressure player that is a linebacker, or he can move more somewhere else and Parsons can move somewhere else. I think those pieces add to confusion for the offense. Plus, he's a really good rusher." End quote from Mike Zimmer on Marist Liufau. What do you think about that?
I like to gloat every now and then. So I think what I have to say about that, first and foremost, on this show, I felt like I did a very good job of stating the pros and cons of Marist Liufau and informing the masses that he is going to go higher and have an NFL role that probably people weren't expected to see, right? Just because he wasn't a great run-stopping linebacker doesn't mean that there's not a role for him in the NFL. And so Mike Zimmer outlined a lot of what I said were his pros. He's a good pass rusher. He has good versatility. He's really smart. And he has
actually good in coverage as well. Never gave up a touchdown pass.
Right. Very good. He's elite coverage linebacker. He can cover just about anyone out of the backfield. And then you combine that with the want or the hunger to learn, the ability to not only learn a defense, but probably teach a defense to, other players at some point. It's really an "I told you so" moment, and I think the part that I didn't think of.
I like how you're just patting yourself on the back for all this.
I mean,
like you're not.
We can pull up the tapes if we really ultimately.
Do you think this is actually like the thing that stands out to me is he wants to be so good and so intense, he's almost too much at it right now? That's a line that stands out to me. Like, is that his poles are out ahead of his skis a little bit? Like what we saw of Marist Liufau, like he just needs to reel it in a little bit.
I think with Marist Liufau, he expects perfection out of himself, and when he doesn't obtain it, it brings him down. And I think that's what Zimmer is ultimately getting at: is you're not going to be perfect at this right now, and so you can't let that affect your play. Essentially, and I think that's what he's saying is too intense. Is I think Marist expects himself to literally pick it up in a day and be able to execute it the next day, right? And so I still think there's a learning curve to being an NFL linebacker.
I can see the pass rush stuff for him right now. I think we could all see that right now, the pass rush itself. But I do feel like Mike Zimmer maybe has a very high level of expectation of what he's actually going to get from Marist Liufau that might be separated from reality a little bit, unless they do these very specific things like you're talking about. If they can, because we all know that in the NFL, depth becomes an issue. And if he's forced into play, just like last year, you talked about how they played the safeties so much at linebacker. Well, they had to because of, they were thin and they didn't have guys because of injuries and stuff like that. If they play to Marist Liufau's strengths, that's one thing. But I feel like the more he's asked to do, the more you're going to see, kind of some of the stuff that we saw here at Notre Dame. Like he's a very situational guy, at least early on.
I think he can be an every down linebacker. I just don't think you're asking, like, again, it's all schematic, right? I don't think you're asking him to plug the A and B gaps on a run game. Like that's just not what you're doing with Marist Liufau. I think the thing that stuck out to me in Zimmer's quote, and something I hadn't really thought of, is the games that him and Micah Parsons can play off of each other as rushers, because Marist Liufau can get after a quarterback with good rushing speed, right? And so when defenses are already worried about Micah Parsons, the ability to maybe, drop Micah Parsons into coverage because he can play linebacker and then bring Marist off the edge, or vice versa. Find a stunt that allows both of them to be blitzing at the same time. Yeah. I think this only enhances Micah Parsons' game first and foremost. And I think Micah Parsons being on the field is ultimately going to enhance Marist Liufau's game as well, because all the eyes and the attention are going to be on Micah Parsons, and Marist Liufau is a sneaky athletic linebacker, right?
I mean, Brent's yelling at you right now that he can't fill. I mean, I think we all know that, but I don't think that that's what you're saying. I don't think that you're saying he's going to be, because like you basically said, he's not going to be
a fill linebacker.
That gap to gap fill linebacker.
Right. He's going to be a boundary off the edge type of linebacker. And so Mike Zimmer knows that. And maybe, and who's to say that Marist Liufau can't be taught some of his, basically be coached up on some of his tackling deficiencies or his filling the A-gap deficiencies. Like, he is still a very raw linebacker, in my opinion. And so I like the first and foremost is his versatility, what they can do with him, moving him around. He's a pass rusher. He can cover. He can play off in coverage, right? Like, there's a lot of stuff you can do with the athleticism that Marist Liufau presents.
And I think that that's what they see most of all is the athleticism. And again, the athleticism's always been there, but being assignment sound has been the weakness. But that's also why I keep going back to if they are able to keep him in very specific roles that play to his strengths, I think they'll be fine early on. But there's a learning curve. And, Brent says definitely not Dre Greenlaw or Fred Warner. But again, two really good athletes, great athleticism there. And, I guess, I would flip that back to were Dre Greenlaw and Fred Warner when they showed up in San Francisco? Or was there a little learning curve for them as well?
Yes.
Great athlete. I think we all know that. But
a lot of people are thinking, is he going to be a starter? I just put it like this. Jerry Jones doesn't waste draft picks for guys who aren't going to be starters. He's going to be out on that field. This.
Good or bad.
They're very proud of their draft picks, and they are going to run them out there. And they're like, Marist Liufau is probably going to, I would guarantee that he plays at least 70% of the snaps on defense this season.
Oh boy, I don't know about that. I mean, I don't disagree that could happen, but man, it concerns me a little bit. Fill in the blank. Former Notre Dame baseball coach Paul Mainieri expected to be named South Carolina's new head coach, and you are blank.
I'm shocked, but not shocked. I thought for sure that he was going to hang it up, but a few years ago, it's already been like 2-3 years, I think at this point, when they had that reunion at Notre Dame and he had just kind of stepped away from LSU.
He'd been out for about a year at that point.
You could just tell by talking to him, the itch was still there. You know what I mean? And so I think he took a few years to simmer down a little bit, maybe gain back some of the health and really see if he, still has it in him. But ultimately, at the end of the day, he can't stay away. You know what I mean? Like that's why I'm not shocked, because he's just a baseball guy. And I think that the more he stays away from the game, the more it really bugs him. And so the ability to kind of come back, I'm most curious to see how this one goes, because, it was Notre Dame and then it was LSU. I feel like this is his biggest leap of faith at this point in his career. Well, he could ride off into the sunset and really just enjoy retirement, enjoy all the accolades that he's done with his career. I think it's a big leap of faith to go out and say, I can come back to, an SEC program, play in SEC baseball and still be at that level that I want to be at.
And it's interesting because now LSU is LSU. It's arguably the biggest brand name in all of college baseball. But when Paul Mainieri took it over in 2007, they were bad. They didn't make the NCAA tournament the year before he got there, just like South Carolina didn't make it I know they didn't make it this year, but they were back-to-back national. It's been longer than I thought it was. It's 2010 and 2011. But what I'm saying is he's taking over a program that, even though they're not LSU, they were elite for quite a while as well under Ray Tanner, who's now going to be his boss there. And what two of the most interesting things to me is Paul Mainieri is not going to go into this. He's going to go into this in a better situation from an assistant coach standpoint that he went into with LSU, even though one of the guys is going to be the same. He took his pitching coach, Terry Rooney, with him from Notre Dame to LSU. Terry Rooney was just at LSU last year as their recruiting coordinator, and Mainieri is going to take him to South Carolina to be his pitching coach again. That's a guy who has head coaching experience and elite recruiting experience. And Mainieri is also going to have Monty Lee on his staff. He's a former head coach at Clemson, who was an assistant coach the last couple of years at South Carolina. So he's going to have two assistant coaches with head coaching experience and recruiting experience in that footprint he's going to be in down there at South Carolina. So I think you can definitely argue that maybe it is a little bit bigger challenge turning that thing back around. But in a transfer portal era and an NIL era, I think that they've got a really good chance with, you're talking about a Hall of Fame head coach with two assistants who have been head coaches themselves who are going to be under him. So I think it's a really
Hall
good
of Fame athletic director as well.
Exactly.
The combination of them four is going to get something done. And I actually I thought Paul was older than what he is. He's only 66, which I think in terms of
coaching ages you, and just like being the head football coach at Notre Dame ages you, being the head baseball coach at LSU ages you, because he, no offense to Paul, obviously, but he aged in his time down there at LSU, because there are big time expectations, but there are going to be big time expectations at South Carolina as well. There are some people, there's some South Carolina people who don't like this. They think, oh, you're bringing this old man out of retirement and all this stuff. Again, Ray Tanner, the guy who used to be the baseball coach at South Carolina, is his boss, and he's the one who hired Paul Mainieri. They had a great relationship back when they were coaching against each other. Ray Tanner has coached against Mainieri, and he's seen him recently. He knows exactly what he's getting. So, I think that you're looking at a guy, his assistant coach, Mark Kingston, took over for him last time when Tanner moved from baseball coach to athletic director. I think you've got the right guy making a hire like this, and you're bringing in a great head coach who I think has still got a lot left in the tank. I think he just needed kind of some time, with some of the physical stuff that he was going through there with the neck surgery and stuff like that, to kind of step away. And I think that his juices are definitely recharged, because like you said, when we talked to him a couple of years ago when he was at Notre Dame, you could see him sort of needing to scratch that itch. Yes. He's going to have a chance to do that again now.
We're talking about a guy that won the whole thing in 2009. He's got 4 SEC regular season championships, 6 SEC tournament championships, 4 Big East regular season championships, and 5 Big East tournament championships with, multiple Coach of the Year awards. If I'm South Carolina, I don't know what more that you want, right? Because this guy has a proven track record. You've been crap ever since Ray Tanner stepped down. And Ray Tanner, this is a guy that Ray Tanner competed against, and you would probably call a rival at some point. And so to me, the ability to, recognize game as game and hire Paul Mainieri and set aside everything else, I think should show that, if Ray Tanner believes in Paul Mainieri and can set aside, their rivalry that dates back to LSU and South Carolina, that he probably made a good business decision on behalf of South Carolina.
Yep, absolutely. And again, I'm impressed with the staff that he put together in a pretty quick amount of, now again, he's inheriting Monty Hall, or not Monty Hall. He's not a game show host, Monty Lee. But again, Lee was the head coach at Clemson, had solid success at Clemson before it kind of tapered off toward the end. But the fact that you've got 2 assistant coaches who have been head coaches, and a guy like Lee, who's recruited that area down there for an extensive amount of time, to have that kind of guy with, the recruiting ins and all that kind of stuff, I think that it's a really good situation for Mainieri. So I'm really curious to see how quickly they're able to turn it around. I don't think it's going to be very long. So USA Basketball officially released the women's basketball Olympic roster, and they say their reason for leaving Caitlin Clark off the team is because they didn't think she had enough high-level experience. Do you buy or sell the rationale?
That is 100% sell for me. And, whether or not you want to say she's not ready because of talent, I can completely buy that, right? But there's no reason that Caitlin Clark can't sit on a bench and just practice and develop with the USA team, even if she's not a starter, even if she's not getting sizable minutes. Like, she is still.
But do you want that distraction of all the questions being about that if she's not getting all those minutes, considering everything that's come in the last month since she's been in the WNBA?
Yeah, because I think it's a lot. It takes away. It's a strategic decision that ultimately is going to alter the future of women's basketball, and that's what women, like, they have been trying to repair the image of women's basketball. They have been fighting to get all these things on behalf of women's basketball. And I think when you don't include Caitlin Clark on the most national stage, you're just basically saying you don't care about, her and what she's doing for the sport ultimately. So I get it that, yes, it could provide a distraction, but she's still, again, one of the most popular players in the league. And it's not like her skill is that far off. She was the number 1 draft pick in the WNBA. To me, and maybe this is a little bit of a, this comparison is a little bit too much, but like, it would be like saying, the number 1 draft pick in the NBA can't be on the essentially the USA roster. Like, imagine had the USA left out Carmelo Anthony, if they'd left out someone like Kobe Bryant, LeBron James. And I get it. These players are probably a little bit better, more prominent than what.
But would you
Clark
have taken
was.
LeBron James as a rookie? I don't think you would have. Like, if the Olympics were that year, I don't think you're taking LeBron James.
I would have.
I understand the
she's
case
going to
for
be
her
on an
being,
Olympic team at some point.
But see, and that's why I don't think that it hurts her just to wait 4 years and be on it 4 years down the road. I just think that she is such a lightning rod, and there is already all this jealousy that we've talked about from these other players. When you're only talking about the select 12 players in, that are going to be on this roster, I think that it would have gotten even worse than what it was. And I think the other side of this is they're going to shut down. The WNBA is going to shut down for a month while they're over there playing in the Olympics. And I don't think that that's a bad thing for Caitlin Clark either, after playing an entire, like just like we had Hannah Hidalgo on earlier, and they're doing their summer workouts right now. And then when school starts, they'll be doing workouts, and they'll get into official practice. And then they go through basically a 5.5 month season. And then she got a couple of weeks break. Caitlin Clark did, and went straight into the WNBA training camp and then straight into the season. She and the Indiana Fever have played more games than anyone else because they're already using her as a marketing tool for the WNBA. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world that Clark just gets to rest her body for a little bit. I think she'll be fine. I think 4 years from now, she'll be one of the stars of the U.S. Olympic team. But I don't think it's the worst thing in the world that she doesn't go right now.
I see. I guess I didn't think of that perspective of the distraction when you're trying to play at on the highest stage, essentially, right? Because you don't want to be going through Olympic practices and reporters continuously asking you, why isn't Caitlin Clark playing, right? Because it should be focused on the team and what they're trying to accomplish. And so I do see that side of things. And another part of it is when you're trying to, formulate a 12-person roster, is you got to realize that pretty much gives you 2 players at each position, right? And so is Caitlin Clark a top 2 guard in the league right now? I would say no, right? But to me, the reason why I was so on board, or so, I guess, in disagreement, is because of, again, she is still the future of the sport, and I didn't think there would be any harm of at least letting her develop and practice with these kind of players and those sort of things. But I do see what you're saying, that it can also be a distraction. So I'm really truly stuck in the middle. I don't know if there is a right answer at the end of the day.
I'm a little bit in the middle, as well. And, like when we do these shows, like being in the middle typically isn't good. But I do think that there are 2, like I can see, like there's a very good case for her being deserving of being there. And for when you're still trying to bring more exposure to the game of women's basketball. And I mean, there's definitely, I can definitely see why NBC would want her there, but does NBC's needs match up with USA basketball needs? Obviously not.
Right.
But, you
they're
know,
there to win gold. They don't care how many people are watching.
Yeah, exactly. And like, there's, like Michael was saying, we talked about this yesterday, there's, I think, an even bigger case for Arike Agumbawale being there, just with what she is producing right now, averaging 26 a game, but she's left off the team. But, you know, you do have a couple of other Irish guards on there, and that's great. Notre Dame has great representation from that aspect. But that, and that's my point. I just think that there are, you know, like there's just as big a case, I think, for why is Diana Taurasi even on this team? You know, like if you want to talk
That's
about
what
that,
I mean.
you know, so there's like,
are we truly picking the best
does
players?
Diana Taurasi need to be there? And then, you know, like when you talk about the development of a player like Caitlin Clark and what she's going to be potentially for Team USA for the next 16 years or
yeah, I mean,
whatever.
are we letting Diana Taurasi play on the team because she's one of the best players? Or are we just letting her ride off into the sunset and get one more Olympics under her belt?
Right.
Because there's more deserving players than Diana Taurasi, skill level wise, that could be on that team.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so after Oklahoma won its 4th straight Women's College World Series and its 7th title overall since 2013, there have been some outcries to move the Women's College World Series out of Oklahoma City because of it being an unfair home field advantage for Oklahoma. Do you buy or sell moving the Women's College World Series out of Oklahoma City?
I sell it. The only reason this is an issue is because the team is winning. If you want to stop that, then beat them. It doesn't matter where you're playing at the end of the day. Again, if Oklahoma wasn't good and another team was dominating this thing every year in Oklahoma City, it wouldn't be an issue, right? If you want to beat a team and you want to take down what I would consider a dynasty right now in college softball, you just got to beat them. And so people always throw a fit when you start beating them and you start beating them consecutively, people start whining and crying and trying to find excuses to why it's unfair. No, get better players and beat Oklahoma. You know, like that's the answer to me at the end of the day. This is a big sell to me.
I completely agree. You know, there was I mean, it's been 20 or so years ago, but the Nebraska baseball team made it to the College World Series a couple of years in a row. Remember when Jabba Chamberlain was their star pitcher and all that? He ended up with the Yankees, but you know, they packed Rosenblatt when Nebraska was there because obviously it's in Omaha, and they didn't talk about, you know, they didn't win the World Series, but at the same time they weren't talking about moving the World Series out of Omaha because you're getting bigger Nebraska crowds in there. And I feel like, especially in softball and baseball, I don't feel like home field advantage is that big a thing. And the fact that in these sports, like even when you go to a super regional, they basically flip a coin to determine who's going to be, you know, you have a 3-game series, they flip a coin to determine who's going to be the home team. Like they alternate. Just because you're hosting doesn't mean you're the home team, and you get the last at bat and all that stuff. I mean, you're just going through a period right now where Oklahoma has just become this dominating juggernaut. Their only other national championship came all the way back in 1982. So this is, you know, it's a recent phenomenon. They're not going to stay dominant forever. So I can't see moving the sport's biggest event out of the city that happens to host it just because the team that's winning right now happens to be a few miles away. So big sell for me too. All right, are you guys going back and forth here on something still? You and Brent chirping at each other?
I just him and Brent and Irish Gordy and we're going at it. I just had to give my final two.
Brent was asking earlier if you've lost some LBs.
I would say probably naturally. I mean, the summertime is really busy for me. I play in a softball league. I play in a sand volleyball league. I coach a team that has practice once a week, and I throw like an ungodly amount of pitches. And then we have games on Saturdays, and then I've been walking every
Does
morning at 6
Does your arm get
a.m.
locked up? You know, like after throwing all those pitches, do you get
It's
locked up?
definitely sore. I mean, going from, throwing 150 pitches on Saturday to playing in a softball league on Sunday, my arm definitely feels it by the time it's all said and done. But, it's just the summertime. I just naturally more active, getting a lot of walks in. People were making fun of my cardio last week, so had to make sure.
You need to run those stairs more often, right?
I guess there's a hill by our house that we've been working on a little bit. So
you got some sun on your face too. You look like you're feeling it a little bit right now.
Yeah,
how much golf has been involved in that?
That's also I totally forgot that out. I play golf at least once a week. Probably golf 18 to 27 holes every week. So just when the summer time comes around, it's just all the athletics come out.
That's right. All right. Good stuff. Appreciate it as always, Jess. I don't know if you saw, we celebrated our 2-year anniversary yesterday.
I saw that. Can't believe it's already been 2 years.
I know. You were getting some love there on the Champions Lounge. So
really,
in the show here a little bit.
I guess I got to go read it.
Yeah. Yeah. Good love all the way around. It's been a fun 2 years. Appreciate you being here as always. And thanks to Hannah Hidalgo for joining us earlier today. If you missed that of course will be you can find it wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll have the specific YouTube video up later on of the interview with Hannah Hidalgo as well. Thanks to Ryan. He had a lot of good recruiting information at the start of the show as well. Jesse, put a little lotion on your face.
The nose is a little burnt.
Hydrate. All right. Thanks for being here. Hit the like button, and we will talk to you tomorrow on IB Nation Sports Talk.
Mailbag.